91 years old, one of Hollywood's last surviving legends, has broken a silence she kept for more than half a century. Sophia Loren, an icon of beauty, resilience, and emotional depth, has spoken publicly about a man she almost never discussed, George Peppard, a star whose brilliance was matched only by the battles he fought within himself. Today, we explore Loren's incredible life, her rise from unimaginable poverty, her emotional truth about Peppard, and the untold story of two great stars shaped by a ruthless industry, fade to title. Sophia Loren's life did not begin with red carpets, spotlight flashes, or the applause of audiences around the world. Her story rose from a place far humbler, shaped by the weight of war and the harsh realities of poverty. Born Sophia Villani Ciccolone in Rome on September 20th, 1934, and raised in the struggling seaside town of Pozzuoli near Naples, she entered a world marked by chaos, hunger, and uncertainty. World War II cast its long shadow over her childhood. She remembered nights filled with air raid sirens and the trembling fear that came with running to shelter as bombs fell in the distance. Food was scarce, comforts were almost non-existent, and every day felt like a test of survival. Yet, even in the bleakest moments, there was something luminous about her. People often spoke of a spark in her eyes, a quiet strength that seemed out of place for a girl living through such devastation. Sophia was not merely beautiful. Even as a child, she carried a sense of determination, a longing for something beyond the cracked walls and broken streets of post-war Italy. She would often gaze out over the horizon, imagining a future she could not yet name but could somehow feel. The little girl who wore patched dresses and survived on rationed food carried dreams that refused to be dimmed by circumstance. That spirit, unbreakable and quietly fierce, became a foundation of everything she would one day become. Her path to destiny began almost by accident when, at the age of 15, she entered a local beauty contest. She was thin, still growing into her features, but when she walked into a room, she commanded attention without trying. Her beauty was striking but unpolished, and yet there was a rare quality about her, a combination of innocence and strength that made people pause. Among the judges was Carlo Pani, already a respected Italian film producer. He saw something in Sophia that went far beyond physical appearance. Beneath her shy demeanor, he recognized an intelligence, a warmth, and a natural charisma waiting to be brought forward. In that moment, he had no idea their lives were becoming intertwined in a way that would shape both their futures. With Pani's encouragement, Sophia began appearing in small film roles, each one allowing her to stretch, to grow, and to step more confidently into the woman she was becoming. The transformation was profound. What began as a timid, undernourished girl from a war-torn town soon evolved into a captivating young woman with a screen presence that seemed almost supernatural. Audiences were drawn to her sincerity. Even before she mastered technique, she had something far more valuable: authenticity. She felt every emotion deeply, and the camera saw it. Her rise throughout the 1950s was astonishingly fast. Films like Ida, 1953, and The Gold of Naples, 1954, introduced a performer who could express entire worlds through a single glance. Directors were mesmerized by her ability to merge vulnerability with fire. While Hollywood at the time was full of glamorous actresses, Sophia brought something different: an earthy truth, a rawness, a soul that seemed carved from her own life experiences. She didn't simply act, she revealed. As her career expanded beyond Italy, she stepped into Hollywood, a world of bright lights, towering studios, and legendary actors whose names filled newspapers around the globe. Yet even in this new, intimidating environment, she never lost her sense of self. She held on to her roots, to the lessons formed in the ruins of her childhood, and they became her compass. The grace she displayed on screen was not merely performance. It was lived experience. Every hardship she had endured, every struggle she had survived, gave depth to her characters. Working alongside icons like Cary Grant, Frank Sinatra, Clark Gable, and Marcello Mastroianni, she became not just an international star, but a symbol of an era. Her breakthrough performance in Two Women in 1961 was not just a triumph. It was history. Sophia Loren became the first actor ever to win an Academy Award for a foreign language performance. Her portrayal of Caesira, a mother desperately tried to protect her daughter during wartime, was haunting, powerful, and unforgettable. Audiences felt her pain because she wasn't acting from imagination. She was acting from memory. She had lived through fear. She had lived through hunger. She knew what survival looked like. By the time she held the Oscar in her hands, the world already understood something important. Sophia Loren was not merely a beauty of the silver screen. She was an artist of rare depth, a woman who carried both elegance and emotional truth in equal measure. Her journey from poor, frightened child to one of the most celebrated actresses in cinema was not a fairy tale. It was a testament to resilience, passion, and the quiet power of believing in something greater than the circumstances you were born into. As Sophia stepped fully into the world of international cinema, her presence only grew more magnetic. Hollywood, with all its glitter and noise, was a universe far from the narrow streets of Pottswally, but she carried herself with the same quiet dignity she had learned as a young girl who survived air raids. She wasn't intimidated by the glamour. She understood too deeply what real struggle felt like. Fame, to her, was never a replacement for substance. It was a tool, one she wielded with grace. Her transition into American films was seamless, though not without pressure. The industry demanded perfection, polish, and a constant reinvention of self. Yet Sophia refused to let anyone reshape her identity. She kept her accent, her Italian warmth, her humor. She kept her essence. Directors often said she didn't simply play a role, she embodied it. And her co-stars, men who were already legends, found themselves mesmerized by the woman, who could be both mysterious and completely open at the same time. She created unforgettable moments with Cary Grant, who was notoriously captivated by her. She matched the charm of Frank Sinatra with her own effortless wit. She stood alongside Clark Gable, one of the giants of old Hollywood, and held her own with a confidence that made audiences across the world adore her. And then there was Marcello Mastroianni, with whom she formed one of cinema's most iconic screen partnerships. Their chemistry in films like Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow was not merely performance. It was a meeting of hearts and artistic spirits. Two actors who understood one another deeply, without ever needing to force it. Yet despite all the glamour, despite the whirlwind of accolades and opportunities, Sophia never forgot who she was when the cameras stopped rolling. Beneath the gowns, the red carpets, and the international fascination, she remained grounded. She often spoke of her childhood, of the strength it gave her, and how it taught her to appreciate everything: love, work, success, even heartbreak, without ever taking any part of her life for granted. Sophia's ascent to the height of stardom did not dim the importance of the man who had first seen her potential. Carlo Ponti was not simply her mentor, he was her anchor. Their relationship was one of the most compelling love stories in the history of cinema, a bond formed quietly at first, almost imperceptibly, but with a depth that neither time nor scandal could break. He guided her career in the beginning, yes, but soon he became the one person who truly understood her, who supported her dreams without trying to control them, who protected her when fame became overwhelming. Their love faced extraordinary challenges. Italy's strict divorce laws, rooted in Catholic tradition, made their relationship nearly impossible. Carlo was still legally married, unable to separate without facing harsh consequences. The two married by proxy in Mexico, believing love would find a way. Instead, the world erupted with judgment and scandal. The marriage was annulled. There were threats of bigamy charges. Newspapers wrote about them with the kind of ferocity that only comes when the world is trying to tear apart something it doesn't understand. But Sophia and Carlo did not bend. They chose each other despite the noise, despite the condemnation, despite the years of waiting. Their love matured in the shadows of legality until finally, in 1966, Carlo was granted French citizenship, giving him the freedom to divorce and marry Sophia once more, this time legally, without the world standing in the way. That moment marked a turning point, not just for their relationship, but for Sophia as a woman. She had fought for love with the same ferocity she brought to her career, and she won. Their marriage, which lasted over 4 decades, was a partnership built on loyalty, tenderness, and a shared vision of creativity. Together they raised 2 sons, Carlo Jr., whose musical brilliance led him to conduct orchestras around the world, and Eduardo, who would eventually direct his mother in one of the most emotional performances of her later years. Sophia often described Carlo as her great love, the person who believed in her before she believed in herself. When he passed away in 2007, a chapter of her life closed forever. She spoke of his absence with a pain that never fully healed. Yet she carried his memory with grace, always acknowledging the role he played in shaping not only her career, but her strength as a woman. Even into her older years, Sophia continued to defy expectations. She never allowed age to quiet her passion for storytelling. When she appeared in 9 in 2009, audiences marveled at her elegance, unchanged by time. And in The Life Ahead in 2020, guided by her son Eduardo, she gave a performance so raw and heartfelt that critics called it one of the best of her entire career. She portrayed a Holocaust survivor caring for vulnerable children, a woman broken by life yet still capable of deep love. It was a role that echoed Sophia's own journey. Resilience shaped by pain, hope shaped by struggle. Then, in September 2023, the world held its breath when news broke that Sophia had suffered a serious fall in her Swiss home. She was rushed to the hospital with multiple fractures. Fans feared the worst. But Sophia Loren, who had survived war, poverty, and decades of pressure from fame, faced this challenge like all the others, with courage, with dignity, with an indomitable spirit that had carried her through every chapter of her extraordinary life. And it was during these later years, when time had softened the sharp edges of memory, that she finally felt ready to speak about someone she almost never discussed. Someone who crossed her path in Hollywood at a time when both were rising stars. Someone brilliant, flawed, intense, and unforgettable. George Peppard, a man she admired, a man she struggled to understand, a man whose life was marked by contradictions and brilliance equal in measure. And after so many decades of silence, she finally opened her heart and revealed the truth about the man the world knew but never truly understood. Sophia Loren's path crossed with George Peppard at a time when Hollywood was shimmering with larger-than-life personalities, each carrying their own shadows behind the glow of fame. She was already an international star, her name whispered in admiration across continents. He, on the other hand, was one of Hollywood's brightest rising actors, a man with the kind of screen presence that made casting directors feel they had discovered lightning in a bottle. And yet, beneath that polished exterior, there was something in George Peppard that hinted at a story far more complex than the glamorous world around him. Sophia remembered the night she first met him. It was at a dinner in Los Angeles, one of those evenings filled with laughter, cigarette smoke curling in the air, and the soft echo of clinking glasses. The room was full of stars. Men and women used to be in the center of attention. Yet Peppard sat quietly, almost withdrawn, observing more than participating. Sophia watched him from a distance before they were introduced, and the first thing she noticed wasn't his good looks, though he was undeniably handsome. It was his eyes. There was a restlessness in them, a kind of tension that didn't match the calm way he held himself. He seemed like a man who lived inside his own thoughts far more than he lived in the world around him. When he finally spoke, his voice surprised her. It had weight, a measured confidence that felt both captivating and melancholic. He was polite, respectful, and intelligent, but there was also an invisible armor around him. He carried himself like someone who had fought hard, not for fame, but for recognition, for dignity, for a sense of belonging in an industry that often admired talent yet crushed spirit. Loren later said that in that first moment, she sensed a man who wanted desperately to prove himself, but who feared, perhaps more than anything, being misunderstood. Their conversations during the early days were simple, almost cautious. George spoke very little about his personal life, but he loved discussing ideas, books, philosophy, politics, the complexities of human nature. Sophia was intrigued by him, not in a romantic sense, but in a deeply human one. She felt there was a man behind the actor, someone who carried wounds he rarely allowed anyone to see. She found herself wanting to understand him, to see past the walls he had built. Working with George only made those impressions stronger. He approached every scene with a seriousness that bordered on obsession. Every gesture was intentional. Every line rehearsed until it felt perfect. He demanded the same intensity from people around him, and sometimes that made him difficult. If a take didn't go the way he imagined it, frustration surfaced quickly. He paced. He clenched his jaw. He argued with directors. He questioned everything: the lighting, the dialogue, the emotion, the moment. The set often trembled under the weight of his perfectionism. Sophia handled him the only way she knew how, with patience and a kind of gentle humor that diffused tension rather than feeding it. She occasionally teased him, telling him that life was not a war he needed to win. George would laugh. But even in his laughter there was something fragile, something that hinted he carried battles he wasn't ready to talk about. She admired him deeply, even when his intensity exhausted her. There was a sincerity in George that she rarely saw in Hollywood. He didn't care for artifice or flattery. He wanted truth in his work, in his relationships, in his own existence. But truth, as she later said, can be a painful burden to carry, and Peppard carried it alone. Hollywood, however, didn't always appreciate the kind of man he was. The industry loved charm, surface beauty, and easy cooperation. George wasn't built for that world. He questioned too much. He fought too hard for artistic integrity. He refused to play the game. And as Sophia observed from a distance, she saw how these qualities, the very ones that made him remarkable, slowly worked against him. Roles disappeared. Opportunities slipped away. The spotlight moved on without mercy. Sophia remembered feeling a sadness about it, a sense of injustice. She could see the brilliance in him, the thoughtful artist he wanted to be, the greatness he was capable of. But she also saw how Hollywood's harsh machinery chipped away at his confidence. When he struggled with alcohol later in his life, she wasn't surprised. To her, it felt like a man trying to quiet storms that had lived inside him for too long. Yet even with all his flaws, she never spoke of him with bitterness. Instead, she recalled the quiet moments no one else saw. George sitting alone between scenes, lost in a book. George asking deep, unexpected questions about the meaning of success. George revealing, in rare flashes, a gentleness that contradicted his stern exterior. She remembered how his conversations sometimes felt like confessions, each sentence carefully chosen, as though he feared saying too much and being judged for it. As the years passed, their paths drifted apart. Their time together became a memory, tucked away with the tenderness of things experienced deeply but only understood later in life. It wasn't until she reached her 90s, after decades of reflecting on the people who shaped her journey, that she finally felt ready to speak about him openly. She described George Peppard not as Hollywood described him, but as she had truly known him, a man of contradictions, brilliance, and fragile strength. A man who wanted greatness, yet feared failure. A man who longed to be understood, even when he pushed people away. To Sophia, he was not the headline, the troubled star, the difficult actor. He was simply a human being fighting battles no one else could see. And in her voice, there was no judgment, only compassion, only truth, only the soft sadness that comes from understanding someone too late to say the words they needed to hear. As Sophia continued reflecting on George Peppard, her voice shifted into a different kind of softness, the kind that only appears when someone speaks from a place of deep understanding rather than memory alone. It was clear that time had reshaped how she saw him. Age as a way of peeling away the noise, leaving only the truth of a person's soul behind. And when she spoke of George now, it was as though she was finally seeing the full picture, the man he had been, the man he could have been, and the man the world never truly recognized. She admitted that George often seemed caught between two versions of himself. One was the strong, confident leading man the world expected him to be. The other, far more vulnerable, was a man few ever got close enough to witness. A man burdened by his own thoughts, by ambitions that weighed heavily on him, and by a restlessness that lived in his bones. She said he carried an invisible pressure, a need to constantly prove his worth, even when no one was asking him to. It was as though he feared that any misstep would cause the world to forget him. Sophia remembered how he approached fame with an intensity she rarely saw in others. For many actors, fame was a thrill, a validation, a doorway into power and influence. But for George, it felt like a responsibility he wasn't sure he wanted. He loved acting, the psychological depth, the emotional exploration, the truth he could express through a character. But he hated the politics of Hollywood, the networking, the compromises, the empty smiles. He felt most alive when he was working, lost in the craft. Everything else felt like a distraction, an interference with the art he wanted to make. She described moments when George's frustration would surface suddenly, almost like a spark catching dry wood. It wasn't anger for anger's sake. It was the outburst of a man who felt trapped by expectations he didn't know how to meet. If a scene wasn't authentic, he grew restless. If he felt misunderstood, he withdrew. Sophia often stepped in gently, not to calm him, but to remind him that perfection wasn't the enemy of greatness. She would place a hand on his arm or whisper a small joke to make him smile. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. But she always tried, because she sensed that behind his hard edges was a man longing for something as simple as reassurance. The most surprising thing, she said, was how perceptive he was. George had the rare ability to notice emotions others missed. He could tell when someone was hiding sadness or insecurity, even when they masked behind laughter or confidence. It was his sensitivity, often mistaken for stubbornness or moodiness, that made him such a compelling actor. He felt things deeply, more deeply than most people realized. And deep feeling, when unguarded, becomes a burden as much as a gift. Sophia Loren had worked with countless actors in her lifetime, yet there was something unmistakable about George. He was never half present. He never walked onto a set without carrying the full weight of his ambition on his shoulders. Sometimes it made him difficult. Sometimes it made him brilliant. Often, it made him both at the same time. As she aged, Sophia watched the trajectory of his life with a quiet sadness. Hollywood's enthusiasm for him dimmed faster than it should have. His resistance to compromise cost him roles that could have taken his career to extraordinary heights. The perfectionism that once made him magnetic became, over time, a barrier that isolated him from the very opportunities he wanted most. When he turned to alcohol, she saw it not as a personal failure, but as an escape, a way for him to silence the noise in his mind, the doubts, the disappointments, the pressure to try to be someone he wasn't sure he could become. She never judged him for it. To her, George wasn't a fallen star. He was a man who had been left behind by an industry that didn't know what to do with someone who refused to play a role off camera as carefully as he played one on it. He wanted success on his own terms, and when the world didn't give it to him, something inside him dimmed. Sophia's voice trembled slightly when she spoke of his later years. She said that in another life, a different time, a different Hollywood, a different set of expectations, George Peppard might have become one of the greats, someone mentioned in the same breath as Brando or Newman. But fate, as it often does, had written a different script for him. When asked what she would say to him now, if he were still alive, her eyes filled with a softness that only comes from love and regret intertwined. She didn't hesitate, but she didn't rush either. Her answer felt like something she had carried for years, waiting for the moment she had the courage to say it out loud. I would tell him that he was wonderful, she said quietly, that he didn't have to fight so hard, that his talent, his heart were already enough. She paused, as though seeing him again, not as the actor, not as a troubled star, but as a man she once sat beside between takes, the man who asked questions that revealed a searching mind, the man whose eyes always carried more meaning than his words ever did. He was a good man, she whispered, even when he didn't believe it himself. For a moment, it felt as though time folded in on itself, as though the decades that had passed since their days together had vanished, leaving only truth behind. Sophia Loren wasn't remembering an actor. She was remembering a human being, complicated, brilliant, wounded, hopeful, and deeply, deeply misunderstood. She ended her reflection with a thought that seemed to capture everything she felt. That despite their vastly different worlds, despite the distance between their lives, despite the years that had gone by, she had always understood him in a way few others did. And that understanding, perhaps, was her quiet gift to him. Sophia took a long breath before continuing, as though gathering fragments of memories that had lived in her quietly for decades. Her thoughts drifted beyond the moments she shared with George and into the meaning of it all, the strange, delicate way human lives intersect, sometimes briefly, sometimes profoundly, and how time itself shapes our understanding long after moments have passed. She said that when she looks back now, with the clarity age gives so generously, she sees George Peppard not as the world saw him, but as a man standing at crossroads his entire life. He was constantly pulled between who he was, and who he thought he was expected to be. Hollywood demanded charm, easy smiles, and a certain willingness to be molded into something glamorous. But George was born with a different temperament, one that leaned toward introspection, toward art rather than spectacle, toward truth rather than illusion. Sophia believed that this tension, this quiet war inside him, was what made him brilliant on screen and restless off it. She said there were times on set when he would become so immersed in a role that it was as if he shed every layer of himself and allowed only the character to live through him. In those moments, he was extraordinary. His eyes softened, his jaw relaxed, and his entire being became open, vulnerable, full of emotion he rarely permitted himself in real life. She remembered watching him during scenes and feeling struck by how deeply he felt every moment, how much his soul he poured into the work. It was a quality she knew couldn't be taught. It was born from a place inside him that was both beautiful and bruised. But then there were the other times, the moments when George retreated, when the weight of his inner struggles pulled him inward. She watched him wrestle with doubt, with frustration, with a sense of inadequacy that contradicted the strength he projected. And yet she never once saw him give up. No matter how difficult the journey, he always returned to the work, to the craft, to the pursuit of something real. She said this mix of contradiction made him fascinating. He was tender but guarded, confident yet fragile, brilliant yet unsure of his place. And while many saw only the surface, the handsome face, the stern demeanor, the occasional outbursts, Sophia saw something entirely different. She saw a man searching for meaning in a world that constantly tried to distract him from it. In her later reflections, she admitted that she often wished she could have told him then what she understood now. She would have told him that the world was never meant to be impressed by perfection. It was meant to be moved by honesty. She would have told him that he didn't need to live up to anyone else's expectations, that he had already touched people through his performances in ways he never realized, that the kindness he showed in quiet moments, when the cameras weren't rolling, when there was no one to impress, mattered far more than he ever knew. Her voice trembled when she spoke about the loneliness she sensed in him. She said it was the kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from feeling unseen. Many admired George Peppard. Few truly understood him. And in Hollywood, where so many relationships are transactional and fleeting, she always felt a pang of sadness knowing how much he wanted sincerity, how deeply he longed for connection without knowing how to ask for it. As she grew older, and as she watched the world change around her, Sophia found herself returning to her memories of George with a tenderness she could not have expressed in her younger years. Age had softened her view, had allowed her to see people not for their flaws, but for the battles those flaws concealed. She realized that George had been carrying burdens that were invisible to most, but painfully evident to someone who had also lived through struggle. With a wistful smile, she said that if George were sitting beside her now, if time could bend, if life could offer one more conversation, she wouldn't talk to him about films or fame or the things the world once held so tightly. She would speak to him gently, the way one speaks to someone who has carried too much for too long. She would tell him that he didn't have to fight the world to earn his place in it, that his value was not measured by the success he gained or lost, that the parts of him he tried hardest to hide were the very parts that made him human, that made him worthy of love, of kindness, of peace. She would tell him that he mattered, that he was enough, and that someone, somewhere, had truly seen him. Sophia Loren's voice softened to almost a whisper as she summarized her feelings. It was clear that what remained between them was not regret or longing, but understanding. A quiet, powerful understanding born not from romance, but from empathy. She said that they came from different worlds, shaped by different cultures, different wounds, different dreams. And yet, in the space where their lives briefly crossed, she found a man whose heart was far more tender than his reputation ever allowed the world to see. In the end, she spoke of George Peppard with a gentleness reserved for souls who were both gifted and burdened. She said that behind every proud gesture, behind every harsh word, behind every moment of stubbornness, there was a simple truth. George was a man who wanted to be loved for who he was, not for who the world wanted him to be. And perhaps that, more than anything else, is what she carries with her now, a quiet acknowledgement of a complicated man and the unspoken bond between two artists who understood each other more than the world ever realized.